This is Zell, or if you want to say it like how some of the characters in games say it, Gzell, but I find that a little bit difficult, so we're going to continue with Zell. This is a top-down affair modeled after the 2D Zeldas, and it does a pretty good job in the early areas of sort of realizing that feel. It will be very familiar to you if you've ever played a Zelda game in terms of its overall structure. You have a mixture between combat, exploration, and puzzle solving, with various dungeons to delve in and bosses to defeat. The whole thing takes place on a sort of mostly derelict space station, which is called the Zell, and it involves a group of survivors on this place trying to sort of make sense of what's actually happening and get the whole place working correctly again so that they can continue to hurtle through space. You are the classic crash-landed with amnesia character trying to figure out what's happening, but you have this gem embedded in your forehead that allows you to mess with some time manipulation mechanics that are involved in a lot of the puzzle solving, allowing you to actually go back to a sort of past version of different segments of the station and interact with them, and then go back forward into the present version to sort of shift around and solve the various puzzles that you'll find along the way. There are also more standard non-time-based puzzles to go through, especially in dungeons and the like, that also involve various gadgets that you can get your hands on. The gadgets are a pretty cool idea because they have both a combat and a puzzle-solving use. Like, for instance, there is a web shooter that allows you to actually web up enemies, drag them towards you in combat, or drag you towards them, depending on the size of the enemy. It can also be upgraded to do things like stun the enemies that it hits, which is very useful. And it's also used in puzzle-solving and traversal to actually act as sort of like a grappling hook and get you around to areas that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get to. There are also things like the stun bombs, which you can have 3 charges of at any given time that will recharge slowly as you use them, and they can be used to, of course, electrify and stun enemies, giving you a good chance to hit them, but they are also used to electrify certain elements of the environment to do things like open doors and the like. Killing enemies, as well as looting from lots of different chests in the environment, will also give you various different kinds of components of different sorts, as well as the circuit boards, which are the currency of the game. They basically act as your rupees. And this is because there is an upgrade system for all of your gear and gadgets. One of the characters named Cheryl in town, you can actually go to her and have her upgrade your various bits and bobs, like for instance your sword, which can be upgraded to do more damage, give you an AoE charge attack, and even give you a sort of short distance combat blink and stuff like that. And your other gadgets can be upgraded as well, like the stun bombs can be upgraded to ignore you so that you can't stun yourself with them, and as I mentioned earlier, your web shooter can be upgraded to stun enemies it hits and things like that. And the one thing I really like about the upgrade system is that it actually visibly affects all of the things that it upgrades, which is a really nice touch. So everything you upgrade actually changes its appearance in addition to how it works. So, you know, your sword will glow a different color, your various gadgets will actually have different models and things. It's a nice touch that helps to give you that sense of progression. And the main structure is that you will be going back and forth between the sort of hub, safe town area, talking to various NPCs and getting main questline objectives, and striking out into the world, exploring the various different regions of the station, and finding the various dungeons. Each one will have important things that you need to fix in order to get the station working correctly again, as well as often dealing with various time manipulation stuff, and a sort of subplot involving these soldiers and people from the past. There's also various audio logs and things like that around the place. There's actually a fair bit of environmental storytelling in these areas, and I have to say, probably my favorite part of the game is its environments. I think they're actually really well made. They're very visually interesting, and there's a lot to see in terms of just exploring the world and trying to unravel what's actually been happening. I'm a fan of the sort of after the end style story where something horrible has happened and it's up to you to walk around and figure it out. You know, I enjoy that sort of thing. I'm kind of a sucker for this style of storytelling, and I think the game actually pulls it off pretty well by creating a relatively interesting world with some kind of unexpectedly dark lore for you to find as you explore around the place. So far so Zelda, right? It's pretty clear what sort of idea this game is going for and how it pulls it off. However, the problem is, this game clearly needed some form of playtesting that it didn't get, because it is unacceptably buggy and unpolished. In fact, it's actually so buggy that I ended up giving up on it about halfway through because I just couldn't do it anymore. And that's actually really unusual for me. I don't like to do that. I don't like to give up on games. I'm a very patient person. I'm like an immortally patient person. Patience is my only virtue. So the fact that this game ground down my patience tells me that the average person would not be able to finish this game because it is just so full of bugs and odd design decisions. But what specifically is actually wrong with it? Let's start with the small stuff, the kind of stuff that doesn't immediately ruin an experience, but all adds up to give a general feeling of the lack of polish. Stuff visually resets very often. So for instance, whenever you open a treasure chest, the little symbol on the map, the treasure chest symbol that shows you there's one there, will open up to show you that you've actually been there, you've gotten that treasure, so that you can look back at past areas and see what you've gotten, except this resets all the time, so that whenever you look back, all of the chests will appear as if they're unopened, no matter what. This is made even worse by the fact that the actual physical model of the chest will reset as well and close, but when you walk up to it, you won't be able to interact with it because you've already technically opened it. This means going back to find chests that you've missed is basically impossible. Ladders reset in this way as well, but only visually, meaning ladders that you unlock shortcuts with and stuff like that, they will go back up as if you hadn't unlocked that shortcut, but you will actually be able to climb the empty space where the ladder should be. The minimap will sometimes just completely disappear and stop working. It will simply show an empty grid instead of showing you where you are, and if you actually go to the map screen and zoom out, you will see that you're floating in the void with no map to speak of. The enemy AI activation distance is actually shorter than your view distance, which means if you look at the corners of the screen as you're exploring around, all of the enemies sort of drop out of the sky as if they're just spawning in or the AI is just activating, and you see this every time you encounter enemies. Your basic attack has this sort of odd lurch forward when you use it that makes it kind of difficult to fight with, but more to the point, it actually kind of breaks the game. You can use this lurch to actually end up in areas you aren't supposed to go. If you use it at the edge of certain jumps, it'll make you fling across the world. If you use it at certain fences, it'll actually bump you over the fences into places you're not supposed to get yet, and sometimes it can even bump you into areas that you get stuck in and you have to reload the game in order to fix. Oftentimes, the enemy AI just sort of breaks and will just stop responding. It'll just stand there as if you're not there and allow you to wail on them and kill them without any sort of resistance. Sometimes it'll break in a different way and actually just keep walking in one direction forever and walk into walls and stuff until you kill them. The game does not have a jump button, instead opting for the Zelda-style auto-jump, where you go to a ledge and automatically jump to the next one, except it doesn't work half the time, and you will constantly be falling off of ledges that you were trying to jump off of because it simply doesn't work. It just decides not to. There were certain puzzles that I had to restart several times because the jump refused to work. But then there are also the sort of odd design decisions that kind of don't make sense to me. Like, for instance, your dodge move has no immunity frames. However, there are certain attacks that basically need immunity frames to be able to dodge. There are large robots that fire lasers that hit instantly as soon as they fire. They close the distance instantly. You can't dodge a projectile because it's a laser. And it tracks you with pinpoint accuracy, which means as soon as it fires, it is automatically pointed directly at you no matter what, and it will always hit you every single time. Now, if you had iframes, this wouldn't matter because you could dodge out of the way. But you don't, so no matter if you dodge or not, you still take the hit guaranteed. You're meant to block these attacks. You do have a shield that can block attacks and you won't take any damage. However, blocking one of these lasers takes about half of your stamina or more, and your stamina recharges extremely slowly, but the robots can fire this laser like once every 2 or 3 seconds. So after just a couple of volleys, you will run out of stamina and you will start taking guaranteed damage that you cannot avoid. Many of the bosses work this way as well. You see, normally in a Zelda-like game, the boss is supposed to be a puzzle boss, right? They're puzzle combat. They're basically like a final exam of all the things you learned in the dungeon that they're in. With whatever new gadget you use to get through that dungeon, you will use to help beat the boss, which makes them a fun challenge. However, in this game, I feel that that is definitely not the case. The bosses almost feel more like blind luck than they do a puzzle, because they are often just reliant on pure damage and odd attacks that are just about impossible to avoid, so you just sort of have to hope that you hurt them faster than they hurt you and that you have enough health consumables to keep going, which does not make them feel like a puzzle and instead makes them just feel like luck. However, then there was the point that actually made me give up, and what actually happened involved a puzzle that I couldn't solve and a whole bunch of bugs that prevented me from knowing what to do. At one point in a later dungeon, you're given a box, and I didn't know what to do with this box at first because I hadn't found anywhere up to that point that actually needed a box to progress, but I started pushing it around to try and see what I could do. I pushed it into a room only to find that there was nothing in that room to use, so I pulled it back out of the room and eventually thought that maybe I could use it to jump to the other side of the room. I placed the box as such and tried to jump on it, and then I got stuck in midair in an infinite falling animation and had to reload my save and start the puzzle over and try something else. So instead, I thought maybe I could use it to jump to the other side of the room that is mostly hidden by the camera, which by the way hides you all the time and does not show an outline of where you are, of where the enemies are, or of where items are, so you're constantly fighting in the dark because you can't see yourself. I used this box to jump over to that point, only to find that that was definitely not the solution because you couldn't get out of this place. It was just stuck in the wall effectively, and you were clearly not supposed to be able to get here, so I had to reload my save a second time and start the puzzle over again. This time I decided that with some clever jumping, I could get over to a certain walkway and pull a lever that I saw. So I placed the box just right. It took me about 6 tries to get the jump to actually work, but once I got it to work, I ended up over where I thought I was supposed to go, pulled the lever, and it looked like the puzzle of the dungeon progressed. Except I then found out that I somehow glitched the puzzle because I wasn't supposed to get here this way, because there was no way down. There was only a door that didn't open from this side, which meant I had to reload the save a 3rd time, and now I didn't even know what to do to solve this puzzle, and that's when I stopped. I decided that that was enough, that I just couldn't do it anymore, I wasn't having fun, and the thing about this dungeon up to that point was that the dungeon itself was not enjoyable because it felt like everything I did was like a 50-50 shot between actually doing the intended progression through the dungeon and breaking something. And it's never a good sign when your players can't tell if they're actually doing what they're supposed to do or if they're breaking the game, because the game is so easily broken and so buggy that just progressing normally kind of feels wrong and nothing feels like it's working like it's supposed to, and that is why I stopped. It is unfair to expect a player to solve puzzles when the puzzles themselves don't even have consistent rules as to how to solve them because the game is so buggy. Like, for instance, when I pushed that box into the room to see if there was anything to jump off of in that room, it turns out you're not actually supposed to be able to push the box into that room. It was a bug because all the other times I couldn't push it into that room anymore. That's what I mean by inconsistent rules. It's hard to tell what you are and are not supposed to be able to do because everything breaks so easily and so often. There's also the point that the game just feels generally unfinished from a puzzle design standpoint, because the very first dungeon, in my opinion, is actually pretty good, and it uses this time manipulation mechanic to some really good puzzles. It's actually quite a nice dungeon. The boss is not the best, it's okay, you know, it works, but the dungeon itself is actually quite fun to go through, aside from all the bugs. However, I've noticed after the first area in the first dungeon, that whole time manipulation thing just kind of stops. Like, you only see it a couple of times here and there after that, which is weird because it's sort of the headlining feature of the game, so it makes it feel like they didn't have enough time to design all of these time-based puzzles in later dungeons and things because they're just not present. There are nowhere near as many of them later on as there are in the first area. So overall, no, unfortunately, I cannot recommend Zell because it is way too unfinished and has way too much work that needs to be put into it to get it into an acceptable state. And it makes me sad because it's clear that these are competent developers that can make an enjoyable Zelda-like time, because the first several areas of the game in the first dungeon are pretty good, and the world building is nice, the environmental storytelling is nice, the art style is colorful and nice looking. It's just well put together at first, but then it completely falls apart, which makes me think that they either ran out of time or ran out of money and had to release it in an unfinished state. So although it does make me sad to say it, I cannot personally recommend Zell, although I will link it in the description below this video if you want to check it out yourself, or if you just want to keep an eye on the patch notes and see how it updates, how it changes over time, because you are interested in it but don't want to pull the trigger until it is more polished. So there you go. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.